thank you all so much for being here. My name is Paul, as Zillian introduced me. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be talking about the Emerald Tablet. We're going to continue the discussion that started last time. And as I mentioned right before we started this, no one has to feel if they haven't seen or been present for part one. There's nothing that's going to be confusing about this. There's nothing that's going to be built on that we're not going to quickly cover again. So one of the things that I love about the Emerald Tablet is it's so small. It's a short little document, but literally Hermetics and so many other traditions came out of it. It's sort of like this little DNA that this keeps iterating and creating more stuff. And people to this day use it. The stages of alchemy, different systems of thought, different philosophies, all come from this thing. So, as I mentioned in the first one, I'm really big on questions, and here in the Rosicrucian order, we work with the law of the triangle, where there's they say all things come about through there's a positive, a negative, and a neutral point. And you can say like the father, mother, and child, or however you'd like to see that. So one of the things that I'd like to mention really quickly is questions, and I'll get into a little bit more about the polarity later. Questions have a negative polarity, which means if you ask a question, that creates a negative polarity that draws things in. So say, for example, if you have a bookshelf, a really beautiful, amazing bookshelf, and you put it up there, within a year, you will have stuff on the bookshelf. You'll get new books, you'll get little statues, incense, or whatever it is, but it has a strong negative polarity of like, this is such a beautiful bookshelf, now I gotta put stuff in it. So there's something about asking questions, something about that negative polarity that attracts it, pulls things in. So a lot of times when I'm working on writing and doing classes, and that's one of the things, I talk about polarity a lot of times, with sacred geometry, like the straight lines are more considered masculine, curved lines are considered more feminine. And a lot of times I need to cover that with alchemy and with sacred geometry. But really what it is, it's not so much focusing on like positive, negative, and gender or anything like that. What interests me most is creation. And for me, it's sort of like if someone was standing back and looking at me, to say, okay, well, he's talking about positive, negative, straight lines, negative, positive, negative, straight lines, curved lines. And then you say, well, I'm focusing on polarity or gender, but basically, if you take a 180-degree rotation, you see that that's not what I'm looking at, it's what I'm looking through. It's like I'm looking through that window to creation. So it's not so much the positive, negative, the curved lines, or straight lines, it's like about creation. For me, it's all about learning to create. So one of the questions, and like I said in the first one of these talks, is I think that questions are the original programs. Like before there was ever software programs, there are questions. And a question is just sort of like in software, you have command. You write something in, and then it starts a process. If you ask a question in the right way, it will start a process. And from your consciousness, it will create a negative polarity to pull a question, to pull an answer in. And like I said, I've got a list on my phone of the key questions I'll ask. I got 20-some questions. And one of the questions that I like to ask, and I'm just introducing this because it's useful to use these ideas to shift perspective, which is what we're going to be doing when we actually work with the Emerald Tablet. So one of the questions I'll ask myself is, what are the geometries? So when I'm working with something, a lot of times there's a story, or there's like dialogue, there's words and phrases and all these different layers of meaning. But if you can just ask yourself, what are the geometries? You kind of take a step back. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll do my best to ask that question, what are the geometries? And let all verbal thought just drop off and just witness the thing and allow geometries to form. And that will give me a different understanding than if I just went purely based on words. So that's really useful. And like I said before, and I think in the first talk, I said that for me, those list of questions, and every once in a while, periodically, I'll just find a new question and add that to the list. But another one that's really good, that's useful, is what is the reciprocal? So I taught a class recently, and I really enjoyed the process of the class, and it was about integral meditation, and it was this way of working with this contemplative and the psychological growth model, putting them together. And I had a great experience, but the only thing is, on the way home, I was thinking, I really would like to find a way to make it even more relatable. Start with people's situations, like their individual conflicts, the stuff they're working with in their life, instead of saying, these are the principles, now go on and apply them, good luck. I mean, I did my best in the class to do that, but one of the things is that, I ask myself, like, what's the reciprocal? And if you do that 180-degree shift with reciprocals, what reciprocals are is if you have like 3/4 and 4/3 or whatever, and you multiply them together, anything like that that's flipped 180 degrees, you multiply it, the answer is 1. That's what, mathematically, it's what a reciprocal is. So if you can flip your awareness, there's a lot of things, if you are working with a process or looking at a thing, if you can do that 180-degree shift and see it from the opposite perspective, instead of looking at something, you're looking from it. And I get this little parrot. Here is the little example. And one of my favorite songs that I think captures this beautifully is the Pixie song. The song of the Pixies, the group The Pixies, Where Is My Mind? And the lyrics are, with your head on the ground and your feet on the air, try this trick and spin it. Your head will collapse, but there's nothing in it. And then it says, where's my mind, where's my mind? And I think it's just a beautiful song. I mean, it's about meditation and yoga, I'm sure. It's like probably someone doing a headstand and then they clear their mind and then, this whole thing, where is my mind? But that perceptual shift, that's the only time I've heard that in music, that taking a perceptual shift and seeing how reality changes. So the reason I bring this up is that I realize that there's two models you can go about in transformation. So you read something like the alchemical stages in the Emerald Tablet. There's two ways you can go about it. You can go top-down. So top-down is looking at the principles and saying, oh, these are amazing principles, this sort of this higher form. And you can start there and look and then have it trickle down to see how that relates to you. So typically, this is sort of the old way in business and marketing, is it was all top-down. So corporations and groups would all decide what policy was going to be, and they put money towards things and away from other things, and it would all trickle from the top down. Now, there's a huge move from the bottom up. So since the rise of the internet and networks and things like that, things like Amazon, you'll have people reviewing books, and books will get different ranking based on big data and large pools of people all giving feedback. Things like Lyft and Uber for people, getting rides. Basically, it's based on user reviews. So people will have results based on individual people giving input. So that's from the bottom up. So it's literally like grass, or plants growing from the ground. It's like individual person by person. Overall, it creates this movement up. And top down is like the principles trickling down. So the reason I share this is in any kind of map, any kind of way of working with things, it's really useful to look at this and then do that perceptual shift. So look at the principles, and then you can say, how does this apply? Like calcination, the first step that we're going to talk about. How does that apply to my life? You can do that, and that's really valuable to go through that layer. But if you get another piece of paper and you do that 180-degree shift, you can look at all the things you're working on in your life, and then say, if that was a stage in alchemy, what would it be? And that's bottom up. So I'm just putting that out there because we're going to be starting to talk about the different maps and different ways of working with things. And it's really useful to use these perceptual tools and geometries and things to step out of our habitual way of thinking. It's really great to be surrounded by like-minded people, like people here, that you can bounce ideas off of, and especially mystical, metaphysical things, and they're not going to look at you like you're crazy. But also, too, it's really valuable to have a certain set of tools that you yourself can shift your own perspective multiple times and get all these different ways of viewing things. And then also connect with other people and ask them their opinion, too. But when you're by yourself writing, or you're in the process of thinking or writing or making a decision, it's really useful to have a handful of tools that you can keep doing these shifts to get different perspectives from within yourself. Okay, so the alchemical processes that we're going to cover, I spent a little bit of time meditating on it, and I was thinking, well, okay, it's a map. It's basically the stages of transformation. So I sat and I was thinking, okay, it's a map. And I just kind of said, what's a map? And I just kind of let all my history or thought of it go, and I just sat there and rested. And that's the other thing about positive and negative polarity, is that if you ask a question and you induce a negative polarity, if you are, say, not impatient, but if you're really eager and anxious for a response, you will get one from just higher thought, but not like deep unconscious or deep subconscious or master within, any kind of levels like that. If you can ask a question, induce a strong negative polarity, and wait, and be comfortable in the waiting, instead of a short little circle, it's going to go way up. The more you can wait, the more you can be open to that process, the more you give it time for those things to come from your higher levels of awareness and filter down through. But it's funny because so many people are not comfortable resting in that not knowing, because we all really want to know. We really all want to look like we know what we're talking about. Which I've given up long ago. But it's one of those things that's really useful to rest in that space. So anyway, and I was asking myself, just kind of sitting with it, what are maps? What is a map? And my first thought was, it shows you how to get from point A to point B. And I kind of smiled. I thought, I was like, oh yeah, that's a pretty good definition. I wrote that down. I was like, oh wait. It's that's totally a male definition of, it's a straight line, geometrically straight line. Point A to point B. This is what we're doing or doing straight line. That's really male perspective. And I thought, okay, well, I'm in a male body right now, so it's understandable that that's where I'd start. And I thought, well, what's the female perspective? What's a feminine way, a more feminine way of interacting with and understanding maps? Actually, before we go any further, there's a process I shared before. So if anyone can look at some object that's in front of them, not look against the wall, but something kind of off the wall a little bit, just anything where there's some depth. So if you just pick some object around, like the podium or the computer or the candle, and then do this, and cover one of your eyes, and look at it. Okay. And now uncover your eyes and look at it with both your eyes. And just see what the difference is. So one of the things the biggest thing that changes is depth. When you have two different points of view that are similar enough that they're relatable to each other, but they're slightly different, that gives you depth. That's one of the reasons why if you have a partner or friends, family members who have a slightly different point of view, and you can talk about a subject, you will get more depth. So in writing this and getting this stuff all together, the first thing I came up with, of course, was a male definition. Point A to point B, here's what we're going to do, that's our mission or whatever. So I thought, okay, well, what would be a more female definition? So sort of in terms of geometry, so if I was sort of the right eye, left brain is more masculine, so it's okay, here's where I started. And then I said, okay, what's a feminine perspective? So I did a kind of cognitive shift, and I realized that you can also see a map as, this is all this amazing terrain, and it's almost like a menu, or here's something, I would love to just go and feel through this and experience this, and have this embodied experience, and savor how the trees look, and look at hiking trails, say, this is going to be near the lake, so we can see this beautiful lake, instead of very goal-oriented, we're going to go here, we're going to go here, that's what we're doing. It's more savoring and moving through the process, more process-oriented. And so I thought that's really good for that. And then once I had those two perspectives, I was thinking, well, sort of like we have the law of the triangle, like the positive charge, the negative charge. And I thought, well, what would be the neutral, sort of the neutral polarity? So then I kind of mentally took a step back to kind of take all of it in, sort of the other point of the triangle. And I realized something interesting about maps, is that really ultimately what maps are doing is it's bridging Transcendence and Embodiment. So when you're hiking, you are in a body, walking on dirt and rocks, and walking around features. That's embodiment. You are in a body experiencing that. When you have a map, that's transcendence. You are looking at the whole thing. You have this map, and it's the whole thing all at once. So it's a way to connect transcendence and embodiment. You can have an embodied experience walking on your hiking trail, yet somehow have a bird's eye view, this transcendent view of all of it. So with this, I'm just letting you know that working with maps, it can be useful to hike or whatever it is, and experience it from these intentionally. Say, let's be very goal-oriented, or let's savor the experience and explore and sense all of the details of things. Or you can feel your embodiment and transcendence at the same time. So just something as simple as a map. With these perceptual shifts, you can experience it differently each time. Okay, so we're going to briefly talk about just these two other maps, just as examples of maps. But really what's going to happen is we're going to focus the rest of the time on the 7 stages, because that is a map too. So for anyone who's familiar with David Hawkins, and I'm using these maps because this shows a way that people might have trouble navigating with maps. They might get stuck. So the David Hawkins, his work is amazing. It's all based on kinesiology. So there's what he calls the scale of consciousness. It's from 0 to 1,000. And he basically says 0 is literally no life force, no consciousness, just blah. And you can see here that it goes humiliation, blame, despair, regret, all this great buffet of awfulness, or whatever. So it's all these things. But you can see each one gets more energized than the other. And his way of explaining it is that it's a logarithmic scale. So each point is much more powerful. Going up by 1 point is much more powerful than the point below it. So if you look at these, you can see something interesting. There's all of these lower vibrational, lower kind of states, and then it gets up to hate, anger, scorn, and then it gets up to trust, optimism, all of these things. So you can see there's a shift. He basically says this is people below can really perceive truth. People below might have trouble perceiving truth and feeling in their body. People above are more sensitive and more open to that. The reason I'm sharing this is that how people can have trouble with maps is if you have a judgment or you have a fixation on something. So if there's a stage, if there's a habit, say for example, if you get angry a lot and you vent that anger, and maybe you feel that anger is part of your personality, and because you say, I am angry, you think it's part of your personality, to lose that anger feels on a subtle level like you're losing part of yourself. So as a result, you're not willing to shift your identity. You don't want to lose yourself. Your body wants to survive. So whenever you say, I am such and such, that gets tied up with your identity. And a threat to your identity is basically, on some level, it can feel like a threat to your survival. So one of the things that's interesting is people that fixate is they identify with these different characteristics and things. Think, oh, people that are angry or people that speak their mind and they're strong and they're powerful or whatever, and they will fixate on it. The other thing that's important to know is that judgment can come in. And we're going to talk about how this applies to the 7 alchemical stages, and then we'll have it next. So say, for example, you can see that humiliation goes through all of this whole spectrum, just like a color spectrum, until it gets up to trust, optimism, you get up to reason, and you basically get up to enlightenment and peace on the higher levels. The thing that's interesting is, so many times I've talked with people and worked with people who run a loop because they have judgment about anger. Especially maybe spiritual people might have judgment about people that are angry or people that get angry. So what will happen is, if they're depressed about something and they can get up to the point where they can feel angry and they can explode, and then they judge their anger, and then they drop back down to despair. So they literally will run a loop. They won't allow themselves to get through the anger, have this cathartic moment, experience it, own it, live it, and then make it right, whatever needs to happen, and then allow themselves to be curious about, oh, I wonder why I was angry, I wonder what the cause of this was. And then allow that buoyancy, what we call levity and gravity, and we talk about the subtle and gross. So higher levels, vibrationally, are more subtle, lower levels are more gross. So increasingly subtle, increasingly gross. So that's kind of how that relates to alchemy. So this is about states. It's about energetic states of being. The integral map deals with sort of developmental psychology. And I'm not saying that there's a correlation this way. This is one thing, and this is a completely different thing. This is like structures, like stages of growth. So archaic, magic, and then it gets into pluralistic, integral, super integral. But there's these different the structures of your consciousness. But at the same time, if you have judgments or about a thing, or identification or investment with the thing, you won't allow the process to flow. So I just wanted to bring these two maps up because these are really good illustrations that I've actually personally experienced and personally have seen people experience that either through some type of aversion or fixation, they're not willing to flow through the whole process. It's sort of like if you're on one bank of a stream and you want to go on the other side of the stream, and you're okay stepping on one rock and two rocks, but there's three rocks you absolutely hate. You are, for whatever reason, morally against those rocks, you will never get to the other side of the stream. Mm-hmm. So, comfortable or uncomfortable, you keep walking. Mm-hmm. You cross the stream, and then you get to the other side, and then you can get in and go from there. So I'm just mentioning that because it's important to look at any sort of attachment or aversion, the judgment or fixation, to see, are any of these stages of alchemy appealing to you, and other ones are just ones you don't identify with, you don't agree with, because that's what keeps it from flowing. Okay, so this is a really great emblem, Azoth of the philosophers. And what's really interesting is the emerald tablet, in its wording, contains these 7 steps of alchemy, but it's kind of hidden. And I have to give full credit to Dennis Hawk. So anyone who doesn't have this book, totally get this book. It's awesome. The Emerald Tablet, Alchemy for Personal Transformation. Dennis Hawk is amazing. So the stuff that I came up with is an original, but how he found the 7 stages of alchemy in the Emerald Tablet, like that's all him. How he identified it. So when you see the name of it and then the phrase, that's his work. So I just want to be clear about that. So one thing I just wanted to point out that's really interesting about this is sort of a mandala or an image for people to meditate on, especially people that are doing alchemical work. One of the things that I found in this that's kind of interesting is that there's the 2 feet, there's the 2 arms, and up here, if you can see, it's the caduceus. So the caduceus, if you remember, it's like these sort of the Ida and Pingala, where it passes through the chakra points, and then up at the top, it gets up to the pineal right at the top. So the thing that struck me when I first saw this is, where's his head? It's not here, it's here. And what's that point? If you stretch your arm out, that's your heart. So in the Rosicrucian, we have this powerful symbol. It's the cross with the rose in the center. And it's that blooming, that spiritual potential, like rubbing and blooming in that center. And that's where his consciousness is focused. And also, we just talked about the masculine, feminine, the neutral, the law of the triangle. On his face is a triangle. So there's a couple interesting things that I love about that. And then what we're going to do is, these are the 7 stages of alchemy that we're going to talk about next. And what I'm going to do is, I'm going to talk about each one, but I invite you to, hopefully everyone has something to write with, even a phone, When I first started teaching, I would have some people just on their phone a lot, and I kind of thought, texting all and then I kind of would say, hey, and they're like, no, I take notes on my phone. I was like, okay, so now I'm good with that. So I'm not going to get offended if someone's like this on their phone while I'm talking. I'll say, okay, whatever's happening, I will take it that you're taking notes. I'll just assume that. So the first operation is calcination, and that's related to fire. Each one of these has a planet, well, a planet or a moon or a star. Planets. So there's a metal associated with each, there's a basic element or energy associated with each, and we're gonna go through them now. So the first stage is calcination. Calcination, the element is fire. And basically, from the Emerald Tablet, the text reads, its father is the sun. It's talking about sort of this poetic unfolding of transformation. So it says its father is the sun, and the sun is this massive, nuclear fusion reaction. And it's amazing. All this bright, all this light, all this warmth. But you can see what's happening is there's fire, there's light, and there's heat. But what's left after after it burns is it's sort of empty. If something burns really hot, you might even see the wood is in the same shape it was. You can go like this, and it'll go poof. You can see that the structure, the bonds are broken. So what's happening is it's breaking down the bonds, and so that it's related to the element fire, and it's also associated with Saturn, which is the slowest of the planets, and it's associated with the element lead. So the thing that's interesting to me, when I was first looking at this, of course I look at something, the first thing I do is I ask questions, and that whole thing. I was like, well, the brightness and warmth of fire, what does that have to do with lead? Lead's like heavy, slow, cold. How does that relate to fire? And then I realized, and through working with it, is the calcination, it's more about friction. It's more about, and it's about your ego too. Because if you've ever worked on a project, and this is what I'm saying about notes, if you see how this relates to your own life, please just jot it down, because these little pieces, if you understand each piece, you can understand all the phases. So what I'm saying about it is what I prepared, but what's most important is what resonates with you about what's saying. How does this show up in your life? So for calcination with me, it's like, okay, how does lead relate? Lead is heavy. So if you're doing a project and you're working with something and there's a lot of resistance, like you're trying to get this thing done, you're trying to push it, or even moving furniture, it's a heavy, you start to feel warm, you start to sweat, there's this heat, but you're moving these physical objects that are heavy around. And for me, that's more about calcination. I mean, there's the fire aspect, but psychologically, it's more about working with that inertia and creating fire to loosen up these structures. But it can involve like frustration with trying to get a project moving forward or whatever it is. And one of the things it's doing is it's helping break down those structures. So the whole thing of, a problem can't be solved from the level of thinking that created it. The Einstein quote is what's happening is if you're hitting your head against the wall and you're working and trying to get through to this next thing, trying to solve this problem, whatever it is, there's the frustration, there's a sort of heat or a certain fire with frustration. There's an inertia, like with lead. But what happens is, if you go through all of this, ultimately, you can feel these structures breaking down. Because if you keep hammering away at one thing, ultimately, hopefully, you learn and do it a slightly different way. So if you work with calcination in this way, you can feel the frustration, allow yourself to get mad or frustrated, just allow yourself to fully feel all of it. Because when we judge, like I said, if we judge and say, no, I don't like to get frustrated, I don't feel comfortable with anger or frustrations, I disown that, well, you're going to have more trouble moving through all these stages. So if you allow yourself to get angry and let it just the fire, and the fire's going to burn the wood, and then when there's the fuel's done in the wood, no more fire. So if you can allow that process to work on you, maybe point little blind spots out, it might challenge your ego a little bit, and you can let go of some of these ego conceptions of like, well, I never asked for help, I can do everything myself. And if you have the frustration of needing help and not having it, and then ultimately you can say, well, it's not bad for me to ask for help. So you're opening up and you're embracing and receiving, allowing more to flow in. So for me, that's one of the ways, a couple of different aspects I see of calcination and fire. So if you want to jot down anything for yourself. So number one, calcination. It can be fire, it can be frustration, it can be anger, but it's all about breaking down the structures that aren't working. So if you're hammering away at something and it's not working, then something needs to change. There has to be a shift for things to transform. Okay, so the next one is dissolution. So in terms of an alchemical process, if you light a fire and you burn the elements to ash, and then you dissolve them into water. What's interesting about this is, to me especially, is that this whole process of alchemy starts with two things that break stuff down. You have fire, which breaks down the structures, breaks things into ash. The next step is dissolution, which is basically having the ash go into water, and then sort of more of the subtle kind of compounds come out of it. So for me, dissolution, for me it feels like if you're really working on a project, really going all out, really doing whatever it is you're doing, you hit a wall or whatever, there's the frustration, and ultimately you're like, and then the fire goes out. And then what's important is to just let it go. To just fully own it, be in it, live it while you're doing it, but then to let it go. And there's a feeling of dissolution, of like that exhale, of just letting it go. And the element is is tin, and the planet is Jupiter, and that's associated with money, and there's certain other things about Jupiter as well. But the thing that's most important to know is that it's about this dissolving. So you broke down the big kind of coarse physical structures. You created ash. You broke down and dissolved some of the ash, so it's becoming more and more subtle. Okay, after that is separation. So, and also too, so the first one was, its father is the sun, and the element is fire. That's from the Emerald Tablet. The next one is, its mother is the moon. And the moon is associated with, like, at night when it's cool and there's, like, dew forming on the plants. And, there's the whole saying of, like, seeing the moon in a dewdrop. So all these little dewdrops, you can see the whole moon in it. So that's related to the element of water, and it's this condensation that happens with the... So the next one is separation. So what we've done is we've had this core structure, broken it down, there's been fire, frustration, whatever it is, and then it's broken down, and then we dissolved it to break it down even more. But you can't keep breaking down stuff forever, otherwise it's just going to diffuse forever and it's just going to basically disappear. So in any kind of process, the next useful question to ask is, well, what's useful? What's valuable? So what you do is you separate. So the wind carries it in its belly. So the first one is fire element. The second one is water element. This one is actually wind because it blows, kind of scatters leaves and blows and separates things apart. So this is related to the air element and wind specifically. So what this stage is it's literally saying, okay, this thing happened, and then I worked with this process. All of these experiences happen. This is when you take sort of an inventory. You take a personal inventory. It's like, well, what did I do that was actually good? What was the thing that I did that maybe got in my way? You sit down, you've cooled off, you've maybe experienced the anger, you've maybe had depression in the second stage, you let all that go, and now you're sort of buoyant. You're just kind of floating there. You're sort of in an energetically neutral space. That you have to have that objectivity to really weigh things, to say what's valuable, what's not. What could help and what could limit the situation. So this process of separation, you kind of take this personal inventory and you go through it that way. And you ideally would identify the most valuable ingredients and put them together. Okay, so the next one is conjugation. So what you do is you have this breakdown of stuff. It becomes more and more subtle. Then you can take an inventory and you say, this is more valuable than this. This is the things that I would like to work with. So the next thing too is with conjugation, once you have these valuable pieces, you put them together. So the interesting thing about this, so with separation, I apologize, I forgot to mention, with this, the element is iron and the planet is Mars. So for this, conjugation, it's actually the sun. And the thing that's kind of funny with this fourth stage of alchemy, and this is kind of where I'm going to lead the talk to, we're going to kind of conclude, is the fourth stage of alchemy, it's the sun. And the element is gold. And a lot of people, they say that the alchemists like turn lead into gold. Well, that whole thing of turning lead into gold is actually called the lesser stone. So the first four operations are complete in and of themselves, but it's kind of limited. You're taking something like lead and you're creating gold. Gold is much more valuable than lead, but what's actually happening in the seventh phase is actually, I found, is pretty amazing, which is what we're going to lead up to. So you have these elements, you've liberated this external structure, you've made it more subtle, then you've separated out the elements. Then once you have the right elements, the next thing to do is put them back together. So there's one of the sort of the shorthand for all alchemical process is they say solve a coagulum. So it means dissolve and coagulate. So it's sort of like dissolving is moving out, and then coagulating is gathering together. And I kind of think of it as like the bellows, or like even an accordion of creation, of like you expand and you contract, you expand and you contract. And ideally, at each phase, you're expanding stuff out, you're making distinctions about what's valuable, you're letting go of the stuff that isn't valuable, the stuff that is more valuable you pull together for your next creation, your next experience. So, conjugation is putting these elements together. It's the sun, it's the creator of the lesser stone. So the thing that's interesting is like, well, where's this process leading to if I thought that gold was gold? So that's really interesting. So you've got this in terms of, human interactions and how I like to see this is conjugation is you separated, what's most valuable in the stage before. You're like, this is good, this worked. You put it all together, and what happens is, I like to call that early success. So anyone who's done a project, you like might have encountered resistance, then you might have had like a little bit of depression, like, okay, well, how am I going to work with this? You let that all go. Then you say, well, what's the stuff that's valuable? Then the last part is you put them together, and you have gold, essentially. You have something that's probably going to work pretty well. You did all these processes, you found the valuable aspects, you put them together, you should have something that really works pretty well. But it's not step 7, it's step 4. So the thing that's interesting about it is that when you go to the next step, it is fermentation. And everything gets spoiled. So what's interesting though, when I was having my trouble when I first started studying Western alchemy, wrapping my head around how's this progress. So you got this thing, it's this, you got gold, there's the sun, and then there's fermentation. But what's happening that's interesting is, on one level that's true, but on another level you have all of these inert things. What happens with fermentation is it comes to life. It's biologically active. The other stages were not biologically active. And there's something interesting about stage 7, that sort of conclusion I kind of drew from this being the next creative leap. And so, say for example, if you are doing a project where you're like, yay, this is awesome, you get to stage 4, you've got that conjugation, you got the best of the best, you put it together, you have this early success, and then if something starts, if the bottom falls out of it, you might follow it, sort of like have the dark night of the soul kind of thing, because you're like, oh, well, if this doesn't work, nothing's going to work, which is kind of sort of early thinking or young thinking around these phases, because you're like, oh, well, I just did all this stuff. And I love Tony Robbins. So Tony Robbins, I'll just give this probably a strange example, but he read all these personal development books, he did all of this stuff, and then he got to a certain point of his success, and then it all failed. It all, he read like 400 some crazy amount of books. He just read and read personal development, yay, advancing, everything was getting higher and higher and coming together. And then all of a sudden, he started sabotaging himself because all of those things had a certain shelf life. meant to last long term. And he fell into a deep depression, which, according, if you've heard the story, he was washing his dishes in his tub in his bathroom, and like living in this small little apartment. And then some people introduced him to a thing that led him to the path that he ended up going, which is like neurolinguistic programming, which sort of developed into what he does now. A lot of what he does is still really based on NLP, a lot of it. But he had to have that dark night of the soul. He had to it's all sort of that collapse, that sort of feeling. So next time you go in your refrigerator and you pull something out, and you're like, oh, celebrate the life and consciousness that's now in your leftovers. And it's, hopefully, instead of asking yourself, staring in your food you really wanted to eat, but now you don't know if you want to eat it, instead of saying, well, is there a biological 5-second rule? How fast is this? Can I make this work? If I heat it up, don't do it. Yeah. So put it in the green bin and allow it to continue its process, its alchemical process in the compost bin. It's all going to be good. So, but the thing is that's the biggest thing I didn't understand. It's like you have the sun and the gold and everything, and you're starting this higher phase of alchemy with something getting fermented. It's not funny now because I do a bunch of different fermented stuff. I do kefir and sauerkraut. And there's a lot of amazing things from doing that I found. But I was like, how is it that this is progress? And it's one thing that's kind of interesting. I didn't really fully appreciate it until I went to the Grand Lodge and studied the alchemy workshop that I went to in the Rosicrucian Grand Lodge in San Jose, is that the alchemists would all their reactions with burners would be burning alcohol. Where would they get the alcohol? They would ferment things. They would mix organic material with water and have it ferment. Then they would move these things into the burners, and they would the retort and everything, and they'd have the boil. And what would happen is they'd distill off the alcohol. And that alcohol is the fuel for the next reaction. So it's literally kind of creating a feedback loop. So distillation is kind of a bigger thing. Fermentation and distillation, which we'll get to next. So this is part of how they created sort of a renewing cycle of having enough energy to further their work and further the transformation. So if you continue to look at this, so we talked about before, the stage before, it's like the creation of the lesser stone, and it says separate earth from fire, the subtle from the gross. It's this stage where a subtle life form is going in, and it may be gross. So anyway, but just focus on new life. This is biologically active material now. It's in its own process of transformation. Before, the alchemist was doing all of the transformation. Now there's assistance. There's biological life working to transmute and work with and create the next stage. So the next stage is distillation. And of course, knowing me, I have to have some coffee or some kind of thing. I think my talks are going to end up being like a Where's Waldo, like people, where's the coffee going to come in, But, so, distillation, it's the steam. It's the process of the vapors. So you created this reaction, so the last 3 phases, steps 5, 6, and 7, bring in fermentation. There's this biological transformation that's happening. Then the alchemist comes in, intervenes, and heats it. And there's the subtle essence of it. The vapors or the alcohol or whatever it is start to rise up and condense down. So it says it rises from earth to heaven. And that's the process of distillation. And the element is mercury, and the planet is also Mercury. And then the last one is coagulation, and that's the condensation. This is like water droplets. So the whole phrase, I had to break it up over 2 slides. So the last 2 stages, it rises from earth to heaven and descends again to earth, thereby combining within itself the powers of both the above and below. So the thing that's interesting about that is the whole thing about the Emerald Tablet is as above, so below. there's the subtle, there's the gross. So it's basically saying through this whole process, it rises and falls. It's imitating that circuit, that subtle and gross. And it's not, it's not judging anything or separating anything. It's literally flowing in a path. So what's really interesting is, to me, is I said, okay, great, that's amazing. But what about the silver gold? And I also had a little bit of trouble connecting with the last stage of alchemy. And the last stage of alchemy, of coagulation, is it's this rarefied essence that comes together, and that's the final result of it. So the two things I was stuck on when I was first studying this stuff was, why is gold stage 4, and why is fermentation, like this rotting thing, why is it considered progress? There's the two big sticking points that I had. And I said, okay, great, I get the biological life thing. What about silver and gold? So here's what I found. This is just my point of view. This is what my impression, what I received from working with this. Why is stage 7 silver? Oh, I meant to mention that stage 7, the planet or the moon is the moon, and the element is silver. So I thought, well, you bypassed, you hit gold and you kept driving, and now you're at silver, So I thought, how's that? But what's actually being said here, from my point of view, is silver is unique because it's the most electrically conductive element of the whole periodic table. It's the most thermally conductive element of the whole periodic table. And when you polish it, it's the most reflective element. It reflects the most light when light is shined on it. So when I meditated on it, I realized these are essential qualities of life. So what you have vital life force, you have nerve impulses, you have energy moving through your body, these, like electricity, your vital energy. That's one essential condition of life. Another is warmth. You have a stomach, digestion. Calories are actually a measure of heat, or heat energy, thermal energy. When you're eating calories, is actually talking about heat and energy. You have warmth, thermally conductive. And consciousness, it's the most reflective metal when it's polished. It doesn't always stay that way, it tarnishes. But when it's polished, it reflects more light than any other element. And I see that as consciousness, like the light of consciousness, or the ability to reflect. So the symbol Om, we have lots of Oms in this temple. Usually it's not this one. We started, Zulia, led us with the other Om. So the symbol Om is the symbol for, or the term for resistance, electrical resistance. So if you have something, say for example an electric stove, you turn it up on high, it gets red hot, and that metal, that alloy is put together for electric coils because it's so terrible, it's so awful at conducting electricity, it gets super hot. But then we say, good, that's useful, we'll make a stove out of it. So really, what happens is, it's the final letter of the Greek alphabet is omega. Omega. So there's omega. It's like the alpha and the omega. Alpha is the beginning, omega is the end. So I thought it was interesting that the final letter of the Greek alphabet is omega. And the final step of alchemy leads to the most conductive, low resistance metal that there is. And just for extra credit, here's Ohm's law. And this is actually useful, really, I find this useful energetically and in terms of consciousness too, is it means that the total voltage, the total power is the current divided by the resistance. So a lot of times people will say, I don't have enough time, and they want to find something to add to their life to give them more time. Or their body is tired, so they want to do things to add more energy. When you do that, you are adding to this side. Resistance is tightness, it's constriction, it might be dogma, it might be fixation on certain things, or attachments, aversions, that's all different forms of resistance. So if you do energy work stuff that helps open up the body, helps like relax and open up things, you're lowering your resistance. You will end up with more energy by reducing resistance. And mathematically, if you divide something by a number, it gets smaller much faster than just addition or subtraction. I mean, division is just a really fast way to subtract. You're basically just reducing it by this amount very quickly. So instead of looking always to say, what can I add to my life to give me more, you can also look at it to say, what's my resistance? What things are resisting? How am I resisting life? How am I resisting change and flow? And that resistance will tie up more energy than, and liberating that, reducing the resistance will increase this faster than just trying to add stuff to the side of the equation. So it's useful to think about in terms of activities you do, how you work with your energy, how your physical body is, your vitality of your body. If you look at ways to get a massage or whatever that's going to open up and relax the body, you're reducing resistance, and this is just going to increase much faster than if you just keep adding stuff to the side. So, right before, we're going to do a process next, but the thing that's really interesting about this is once you go through those 7 steps of alchemy, what you have a substance. And it's much more subtle than the lead you started with. This rarefied vapor that's condensed, or the essence of whatever it is, it's a lot more rarefied than the lead that it started with. But it's not just this, it's actually a spiral. So you go through the stages, and you'll be at another level. You can then start again. So one of the best examples I found of this is martial arts, pretty much all belts start white belt, and then you go through the different colors, then you get a black belt. And people stay at black belt, you get it like 1st degree, 2nd degree, 3rd degree. So what happens is the belt, if you progress through all the levels of it, you won't wear any belt longer than you wear a black belt, because you have different levels or stages of development with black belt. So as a result, the belt gets worn and faded. And they say that is the expertise that then kind of dissolves and gets back into that beginner's mind. Or like the thing of that I love, the quote that I totally is amazing from Charlie Parker, of you learn all the skills and all the everything, you learn all the structures and stuff, and then you ultimately forget all that stuff and just play. So he was on another level, but he got to that stage of emptiness. He got to that beginner's mind where he could just get there. He absorbed all the stuff and then let it all go, but he had internalized it all. So the stages of alchemy, it's about moving through, and real mastery is saying, okay, well, I did one on one. So that's the other thing about geometry and shifting perspective. You can look like you're going in a circle, but if you take a shift, you can see that you're going in a spiral, because each time you go around that circle, you're a different person in a different place. So if you look at this, you can see that as soon as the cycle closes, you have the opportunity to do another cycle and create even more subtlety, or whatever it is that you choose. So that's the end of the talk, but what I'd like to do is, if you can take out your paper, pen, or whatever you'd like to take notes with, or whatever you're working with, and I'd like for you to look at, hopefully you're taking notes about the 7 elements. If you could write down on the paper or whatever you're taking notes with, what's one of the biggest challenges or projects you're working on in your life right now? So just take a moment, just kind of jot that down. Okay, and once you have it, we're going to focus on just three things. So the first thing is, where are you at in the transformation process of that? Are you pushing a heavy weight and you're all that frustration and all that, a lot of anger or whatever? Maybe you're in calcination. Or maybe you keep working at it, and then you feel like that sort of, it's never going to work, it's not going to work, how's it going to work? That depression or that feeling. Or maybe you've gone through the sort of roller coaster and you've taken a step back to say, what do I have? Like, let's take an inventory. And then after you have an inventory, stage 4, you put it together to say, here's the best of the best, let's put it together and do something with it. Or maybe you're at the stage of, oh, I've tried all this stuff, and this would work, but it wouldn't work forever. You know, this would work, and it would fall apart. This other thing would work, and it would fall apart. The other thing I was going to say about just about silver is in the process of looking at these challenges that we have, is like life continues, it never stops. Another reason why I think that silver is regarded as the ultimate stage, because of those 3 vital elements that I found in it. Also too, you have to polish it. And gold, you don't have to ever polish. But life, you have to polish. Things tarnish. You can't just, and then it's gold and shining forever. A lot of things about life takes work, it takes maintenance. And I think that silver famously becomes tarnished, and it's an imitation of that quality of life. Just like it has those 3 vital elements, you have to polish it and renew it for it to be the most reflective element. Otherwise, it becomes one of the least reflective elements. Okay, so you have hopefully a situation in your life. Write down first what phase you think that you're at. Okay, so the next part is, what are the things of alchemy, what are you most naturally drawn towards? Do you have a bias or favoring of one of the stages? Do you find yourself getting mad a lot and being really fiery like calcination? Is that you get stuck there? So we're looking first at attachments. So is there any phase that you get stuck on, that you're fixated on or attached to? So that's the first bias to look at. So first you look at your situation, you look at where you happen to be in the process of transforming that from where you'd like to be, what you'd like it to turn into. So you're looking for your fixation, anything that you naturally gravitate towards. Maybe there's the depression, or maybe you're always kind of cold and clinical. You say, well, let's take stock of this. Let's look at this. But if you don't allow yourself to have the fieriness of calcination or the wateriness of dissolution, you're not going to be able to flow as easily through all of these stages and do the complete transformation. So there's the situation. There's sort of your fixation or attraction. The next is, what's your least favorite phase? What's the one you find least comfortable? I mean, you know, for most people it's probably fermentation. But what's the one phase that when you heard about that, you're like, no, I don't want to do that. So if you get fixated on this stage, you will have trouble moving to the next. If you have extreme aversion to a phase, you will come up to it and say, nope, I'm going to keep moving and have I just want to make sure people don't substitute movement for change. Because you can run in a circle and it looks like you're doing a whole bunch of stuff. But you're not really necessarily going through all of the phases. So look at your situation. What phase are you currently in with it right now? What are the things that, like, yes, I'm all about taking the best of the best and yay, but I'm not willing to do the next step of fermentation. And a lot of people, you know, sort of resist that. So if you do that, you will have the early quick successes, and then if it falls apart, okay, and then you go and do something else. And a lot of times people that dabble is like, you get to that early success, get to stage 4, okay, this new thing, okay, now stage 4, okay. I get up to the fermentation stage or the dark night of the soul, and I'm not willing to persist to move through that to the more subtle stages. So as long as you can identify, and my intention for today is laying out, working with maps, working with geometries and spatial, geometrical shifts to get the most out of these maps. And then look at, like, what are your fixations, what are your aversions, and where do you happen to be in, what phase do you happen to be in something that matters the most to you, a stage of change right now. Because if you can say, okay, well, my bias is really to stay stuck on this phase and to never pass through this stage because it's uncomfortable, then you won't be able to go through all 7. But if you can identify the fixations and aversions, and if you can do your best to move through it consciously. So if you don't like fermentation or the dark pit of the soul, most people don't. If you don't move into it, you won't be able to move through it. So what I would say is if there's something that you're really uncomfortable about doing, is do it, but do it consciously. Don't do like this, you know. People that go in the rain and they get all tense, you know. Sometimes it's fun to just walk in the rain and just allow yourself to be wet and just fully embrace and experience the wetness, not try to resist it at all. It's like people that avoid questions, like the not knowing. And when you start to work, people that work out really intensely, you start to enjoy the muscle fatigue, the burn. It starts to become like a good thing. With me now, with questions, I kind of enjoy the not knowing or the light confusion and like resting for a long time in that negative polarity, you know? It's like one of the things I do is I do like the cold water, the Wim Hof, like the cold exposure, cold showers and stuff like that. At first it's like, and then at a certain point you can allow the space for it to flow a bit. So if you increase your ability to consciously flow with whatever transformation it is, if you move into an uncomfortable thing, just absolutely be with it. Be aware, be open. They say, there's a lot of phrases that I think are sort of incomplete. They say practice makes perfect. Actually, it doesn't. Conscious practice makes perfect. If you just practice the wrong way, you're getting so good at practicing the wrong way. If you have sloppy technique, you're getting sloppier and sloppier. You know, conscious practice makes perfect. So if there's a phase that you don't find comfortable, take a step back and realize that might be the sticking point. That might be the only sticking point for you out of this whole 7 phases. So just allow yourself to be aware and present. Be aware of your experiences that shifts through time moving through this. And once you develop tolerance, just like cold water now, it's like taking like a cold shower or whatever. I don't feel cold, but I sense cold. I'll feel it on my skin, but I won't shiver and shake. Like it's just the body adapts. So as you move into these different ways, if you move into whatever phase is most uncomfortable for you, and you just be there and experience it, and be aware and alive and alert, you can learn why you are so averse to that. But when you do that, and you process it, and you can get through that phase, transformation can happen much more quickly. Because if you always slam on the brakes before you get into a certain phase, you will never be able to complete the circle, let alone be the upward spiral. So anyway, that's it for today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we're going to do the part 3. We're going to be doing the third part on the Emerald Tablet. I figured, you know, Hermes is called Rice Great Hermes, so I'm going to do 3 talks. Not saying they're all going to be great. I'll try. But I can't say they're going to be great. But I can say that I'll do 3. So that's what I can do. So anyway, well, thank you so much. Next month, it'll be part 3, sort of wrapping up the Emerald Tablet, and then we're going to be launching into something after. So awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.